With the new featured exotic armors list comes fresh builds, and with it, some that are whack and some that are wild. So, let's talk about Felwinter's Helm. Felwinter's was one of those exotics I always slept on, never really thinking much about, and rarely equipping. Reading the description, it comes across as a pretty basic exotic that simply gives you an extra tool in your kit to apply weakening through your melees. Being the least melee-centric class as a warlock, I always found that there was a trade-off that made Felwinter's a less desirable pick on a majority of the subclasses. The stasis melee just doesn't really work for it, Arc doesn't have the survivability to justify getting that close, Pocket Singularity was pretty unreliable and didn't do much damage before Edge of Fate, plus you could already apply weakening through your grenades on Void, and the solar melees were hit and miss since they also didn't hit very hard, and if the enemy died from Scorch and not the melee, you were out of luck. Strand felt the best to me with 3 charges of needles. I'd occasionally use it as a means to apply weakening to a boss during bait and switch rotations, which was functional but nothing special. And then came Prismatic. Prismatic's been unbelievably potent since its release last year, giving you the best of every single world while completely foregoing any limitations present in a standard subclass. I generally prefer to avoid Prismatic as a result of this, since I think making those build decisions and those sacrifices are what makes buildcrafting fun and challenging, but I'd be doing a complete disservice to Felwinter's if I wasn't to use it here. Put simply, this is hands down one of the most effective, synergistic, and destructive builds I've ever played with, while also being one of the easiest to use. By pairing Felwinter's with Slide Lightning, Devour, Facet of Dawn, and Facet of Purpose, pressing 2 buttons, you not only instantly clear everything around you, but you get 5 of the best tools in the game from 4 of the 5 subclasses with Devour, Radiant, Jolt, Woven Mail, and Weakening. You also have 3 charges of Slide Lightning with Needles equipped, which turns into about 300 charges once you transcend, which also adds in the only remaining element left with the slow from your grenade. Adding in another exotic I normally sleep on with Monte Carlo, it pushes this build beyond anything reasonable and ties everything together to completely trivialize the game. As this series has started to find its legs, I've thought a lot about buildcrafting as a whole and what it is that draws me to it and why I think it's such a personal experience for every player. So similarly to last week's episode with Prometheum Spurs, I'm going to use this build as a basis for a discussion and try to give you an old man's perspective on his approach to Destiny while waxing a bit lyrical on why it's all so special. I'll get the build out of the way first though, so you know what the deal is, and I can get more philosophical afterwards. Felwinter's Helm gives your powered melees the ability to weaken enemies on hit, which is a 15% weaken similar to most forms in the game like Withering Gaze. When you kill an enemy with a powered melee, it applies a burst of a 30% weaken in a radius around them, and killing more powerful targets increases the radius of the weaken and increases its duration. Arcane Needles and Slide Lightning, as I like to call Lightning Surge, is a terrific combo here since you have 3 charges of either a long range, high damage melee, or a close range add clear option. Both activate the Weakening as well as Devour and Facet of Dawn for you to go Radiant on top, buffing your weapon damage and making them anti-barrier. Super choice doesn't matter too much here, but I like the option of adding in Woven Mail with Facet of Purpose to increase my damage resistance, so I've been running Needle Storm. Nova Bomb would work great too, since you'd gain an Overshield instead, and either option will synergize with Shield Crush to increase your melee damage when you have those buffs. Your grenade's also up to you. I just personally really like Vortex, and I've been using Facet of Dominance for an extra weakening source, which you can also use with a Storm Grenade if you'd prefer the Jolt, or needed another option for Overload champs. Monte Carlo is a huge addition to this build, which I would highly recommend if you have it, as simply dealing damage with it gives you a ludicrous amount of melee energy back with the chance to completely restore a full melee after any kill. Monty also has Markov Chain, which is essentially Swashbuckler but with double the buff, for a maximum damage boost of 65% at max stacks of 5, which stacks 1 at a time on Monty kills, but any melee kill, powered or not, gives you full stacks. With Monty being kinetic, it pairs perfectly with TechSec armor to add in Disorienting Blast on top of the debuffs you're already applying with your abilities, so as you're clearing enemies with Monty to regen your melees, you'll also be controlling the crowd as you pop shields or gun down majors. I've been running a mix of Brawler, Paragon, and Gunner armor to get my melee stat up as high as I can get it, while keeping my weapons as close to 100 as possible. My armor isn't exactly optimal, so my weapons settled at 90 in my build with my melee at about 140, which I was happy with since 2 fonts bring that up to about 180. I know Light.gg says that fonts are 30, 50, 60, but I tested them in the range by decreasing my stat from 200 in increments of 10 to see when the damage number would decrease, and they each seem to be worth 20 stat points, with 2 being a total of 40. This could be wrong, but anyways, at 140 stat, 2 fonts got me to that 180 range, which I was more than happy with. I personally really like to run a half melee mod on my gauntlets, since that lets me add in 2 fonts as well as heavy-handed to generate orbs off of my powered melee kills. While you do technically lose 5 melee points, you're still at a net positive when you have armor charges by adding in that second font, and with the amount of melees that you'll have to throw out, it'll be your main source of orb generation as well, which synergizes perfectly. The rest of the mods are pretty loose, and you can use whatever works for your weapons of choice, but I went for kinetic surges to increase Monty's damage even further, as well as kinetic siphons for more orbs, and kinetic ammo generation to get extra bricks while I'm building those melees. I've been using a returned memory and an outrageous fortune as my other weapons, so I can have an unstop option with the rocket sidearm, and some good damage with a bait and switch GL. You could use heal clip on return memory if you wanted to for another option for healing, but with Devour rolling, I didn't feel like I needed to, so I went with lead from gold and one for all instead. For the artifact mod, synergize to get the champ stuns you need first, and then I'd also recommend reciprocal draw if you're going to use a rocket sidearm. You can also use tightly woven to increase your grenade and class stat, and cauterize darkness so that targets you unravel with your needles or hit with your transcendent grenade take extra solar weapon damage. The most important mod, however, is absolutely Shield Crush, since you'll be generating orbs constantly with Slide Lightning and Monty kills, and picking them up to gain Woven Mail will further increase the damage you're doing with your melees. So, with the logistics out of the way, the game plan is about as simple as it can be. Slide Lightning into a crowd to clear out any low-level adds, which will give you Devour and Radiant, while also weakening any enemies left in the area. Pick up the orb you generate to keep yourself safe with Woven Mail, and activate Shield Crush and your Armor Charge mods to up your melee and your kinetic damage. Start slaying out with Monty to regen that melee, focusing on yellow bars first so you can disorient with Tech Sec Blasts for extra crowd control and build Transcendence. Rinse and repeat until the cows come home, and you've got yourself about the juiciest build you can get. So, like I said at the top, this is easily one of the strongest builds I've ever used. Not only does it deal an absurd amount of damage, but you've also got maximum survivability with Devour and Woven Mail, while weakening and disorienting enemies, making them more susceptible to damage, while you're drastically less susceptible. While this is obviously great, I just sort of dislike how all-encompassing Prismatic is, and how 95% of the time it's the best option and never requires that you make any sort of sacrifices or unique build crafting decisions. To compare examples from other subclasses, with Arc, you have a potential for great crowd control with Jolt and high ability uptime with Ionic Traces, but it's a high-risk, high-reward decision as your survivability options are limited. On Solar, you have access to ignitions and damage over time, but your healing also applies over time, which is riskier since it's easier for enemies to outpace. On Void, you're given great survivability with Devour, but the caveat is that you need to constantly slay out to survive, and your utility options like volatile rounds require synergizing your weapon elements as opposed to something easier to use like Radiant. On Strand, you deal a lot of damage but have almost no survivability, and Stasis causes a significant amount of crowd control, but it isn't high on damage output with abilities, and it's also limited on survivability. All the base subclasses intrinsically have strengths and weaknesses that make them interesting to build around, and better or worse for different situations and playstyles. Since you have to take all those factors into consideration to properly synergize your build, there's a real sense of difficulty in it and a sense of accomplishment when you can really get the wheels turning and get that build you've been working on just right. Prismatic has none of those limitations, and there's no sacrifices you need to make. It's so well-rounded and so strong, there's almost no thought that needs to go into building around it since you essentially can't go wrong. Every single option at your disposal is the absolute best available in every single category, while also adding in one of the most powerful abilities in the game with Transcendence. Almost every exotic available will perform better on Prismatic than a base subclass, unless it just can't function on it at all with something like Geomag, since Chaos Reach isn't an option. As a result, to me, Prismatic not only lessens the value of build crafting in general, but it discourages me from needing to think about how I want to approach an activity or how I'd like to experiment, since now all the most powerful builds in the game are also the most well-rounded and widely usable builds, like this Felwinter's build. As I'm sure many people have done for the last year, you can simply put on one Prismatic build and never need to switch off of it or try anything new, from weapons to perks or exotics, and you'll be able to trivialize almost everything the game has to offer. I understand for certain players, and perhaps a lot of players, this power fantasy is exactly what they're looking for, and it's fun or rewarding. But for me, I couldn't be farther from that opinion. Prismatic, while novel and clearly potent, almost completely detracts from the joy I get from build crafting and reduces the difficulty of the game to such a degree that I find it far less fun, since I don't feel challenged or feel like I have to overcome the odds to earn my success. With Prismatic, the odds are stacked so heavily in your favor, there's almost no chance you can lose, unless you're as bad as I am, but unfortunately no matter how hard I build craft, I can't seem to synergize my aim. Now, this is not to say that Prismatic needs a nerf or this or that. I never really think like that, and I don't mind that it's in the state it's in. For me, if something doesn't fit with my playstyle, whether it feels overly weak or overly strong, I just move on from it and don't use it. While it may be a popular response among players, I don't think that things I dislike automatically deserve to be nerfed or buffed just to suit my preferences. If you enjoy Prismatic, take advantage of it and have fun, but for me, I personally prefer to avoid it, only using it when it's absolutely necessary. For the remainder of the exotics I'll be discussing for WACK or Wild, I won't be using Prismatic, and today's an exception as it's definitely worth highlighting a build that's this exceptional for those out there that want to be at their absolute best and want to enjoy something as potent as this. I'll be building the rest of the episodes around base subclasses to challenge myself to make something effective and fun to use while still working within the limitation of those subclasses, which have always made buildcrafting so enjoyable for me to learn and experiment with. So with that all being said, this still stands as one of the best builds I've ever used, and it's an absolute blast to lay out anything that would dare to stand in your way with near constant ability uptime, massive damage boosts across the board, and maximum survivability. I'm happy to say Felwinter's Helm is absolutely, almost overly, wild. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. There's a dim link down below in the description if you want to give this exact build a try, or if you want to use it as a base for your own spin on it. Subscribe to the channel to keep an eye out for more videos soon, and let me know in the comments what you think of Felwinter's Helm and Prismatic.